Hello and welcome to Board Game Bonkers. This is Under the Meeple Light Show, and today we have a special guest, Thomas Lesperance, and I'd probably butcher that, who is the designer of Decrypto, a very popular recent game release. Welcome, Thomas.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks so much for coming on, and why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
All right, so I'm a game designer based in Montreal, and as you said, I've designed Decrypto as well as a few other games on the market currently, and a few others that are gonna come out in the next year or so. And yeah, actually, I'm not really sure what else there's to say. I've been playing games since I was little, as most people I think who design games have, and it's been a lifelong passion. And I think there's a great power in games and the kind of experience they can give, and um, yeah.
Well, hopefully we'll learn more about you as the questions come out. And if you're not familiar with this format, so what will happen, we'll be presenting 10 questions to a guest, but our guest has no idea what the questions are, and we have no idea which questions will be coming out. That's because they'll be drawn from this bottle. Now, when we finish with those 10 questions, we'll be moving them to the side, so future guests coming on with 10 completely new and fresh questions. So, will our guests fry even the Meeple lights, or will they be a little bit nervous? We're about to find out as we present 10 questions to our guest. Are you ready, Thomas?
I think.
Well, big to find out.
All
So,
right.
let's dive into question number one. Okay, so which specific source outside of Board Game Geek do you go for information on the board game industry? So is there any particular websites you go to, whether it's to do with game design or whether it's to do with general information about the board game industry?
I mean, I guess mostly like individual companies' sites. Maybe the site of some podcasts like Ludology, and yeah, stuff like that. Mostly individual sites. I mean, there's a French site also that's called Trick Track, that I used to go to also a little bit, but Board Game Geek still is, the main source of information, I think.
Yes, absolutely. It's kind of almost the king of sites, isn't it, to go to for all types of information.
Yeah, I think especially for everything board games is very concentrated there. I mean, like in video games, you have like a ton of different sites and places you can go for news, and even YouTube. Although I guess YouTube would count as also a site where I go to for industry news, of course, reviews and whatnot. But yeah, I guess YouTube would be the second one I would go to the most.
Yeah, I think a lot of people go on YouTube. I keep getting told to spend far too much time on it. In fact, majority of death of me watching board game reviews on YouTube. But hey, it's a great place to get content.
It is.
So that brings us to question number two then, Ty. So let's dive in and see what comes out. So number question two. So are crowdfunding stretch goals truthful in what they say they are? So do you do much crowdfunding?
Not a lot. Of the 4 games that I made that got published and are on the market, only one was on Kickstarter, and of the ones that are coming out in the next year, I think all of them are going to be through the traditional distribution channels. So yeah, I've only did it once. It was not a perfect experience, I guess I'll say. It's a euphemism um, for a lot of different reasons. So I mean, I cannot say really personally. I think generally, stretch goals are fine. Like, I think they're truthful most of the time. It's maybe not a strategy that I personally, you know, like, especially as a designer, or the type of game that will go well with stretch goals is not the type of game I like to make, I guess is what I'm saying. But I have nothing against them, as in principle. I think it can be well done, and I understand their value insofar as crowdfunding goes.
Yes, absolutely. It's all part of marketing, isn't it? It's, when you're trying to sell a game, get people to purchase an item, you use every strategy possible, don't you? And I'm sure there's little light, white lies, I would just say, that's perhaps, maybe that too to stretch a little bit. So, for example, it might be, we're going to increase the thickness of cards. And they might be already know the cost of that. They could probably fit into, I've seen Kickstarter games where they said, well, actually, we'll give you stretch goals anyway. So it has been in some practices that has happened. And I don't think people deliberately going to just be a liar and untruthful. I think they do it as part of marketing strategy, and I think that's fine. All companies do it, all people do it. That's what they try and get the customers in, and I think that's fine. I think where the ethical comes in is where that truth widens too much.
Yes, I would agree. I mean, it's difficult to say just like in general if we're not talking about specifics, but yes, I would agree that if it goes too far into, lying, of course, that's problematic. But yeah, I mean, as you pointed out, I think a lot of them are things for which they're already planning to do, right? Like they've probably already um, uh, had a quote from the manufacturer for thickness of card or whatnot, and they're already planning to do it. But they put this as a stretch goal just to get people excited, right? Because they think they need those to get more money, right? So I'm not as concerned about this, I guess. But have you seen anything like in particular that you thought was overboard?
Um, I wouldn't want to name names, but I haven't particularly come across it. I backed quite a few games and I've been happy with it. And I honestly don't care if they say it's going to be an extra thickness and it doesn't meet the stretch goal and they give you it anyway. I don't care. Hey, oh, brilliant, fantastic. I got it anyway. And I like that excitement of seeing stretch goals. I think it's a good thing. And I don't mind that at all, as long as that doesn't stretch too far outside. It got, without going too far. There are a couple of examples. I wouldn't want to go into it. I would like to keep this really positive because I think stretch goals
Okay, okay.
fantastic thing, and I think it brings in a lot of customers. And really, without it, we've seen evidence to show that sales don't do as well unless there are stretch goals.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you've said.
Fantastic. Well, I'm sure there's keyboard warriors out there. Well, there might be a few people that think differently. It'd be great to hear from people. So if you think you're at home and you think differently, well, let us know in the comments down below. Perhaps you think differently. And perhaps, you might be a bit outraged. Am I making these assumptions up? Well, I'm not. I have some facts, but let's not go into them. But it'd be great to hear from you in any case. So let's move on to question number 3, Thomas.
All right.
So number 3, where do you draw inspiration and ideas from in your game design?
I mean, So it's kind of a tricky question in a way. I don't know if I take my inspirations from like one specific place every time. Of course, it can be any number of different things. Um, I mean, I try first and foremost to make games that excite me personally, right? Um, and sometimes, so in some cases, I'm trying to convey a specific kind of experience, right? So, um, for example, like Decrypto, right? Part of the inspiration was so my grandmother likes to play bridge, right? And in bridge, there's certain conventions as to how you can talk to your teammate about what you have in your hand, right? Give some clues about, okay, I'm really strong in this suit or weak in this suit and so on, right? And there's all these conventions because you cannot say it outright, right? But they still have some accepted ways of like giving some clues. And I've always found that quite interesting. So I had this experience of like, okay, trying to send a code to someone, but it needs to be vague and you don't want it to be intercepted, right? So that was sort of the inspiration of. And at first, my first ideas were not necessarily about words. Like I was not planning necessarily to do a word game. I was just trying to convey this particular experience of like sending a code and having it be potentially intercepted, right? And it just appeared to me after a certain time that words was the most interesting way to do it, right? So that's one example. One game that should come out this fall or maybe early next year is like a tile laying game, and the tile kind of pile up and sort of do an island, right? And for example, for that game, my inspiration was much more about the visual, right? I had this vision in my head of like a mountain of tiles, right? That's been built up as the game goes on, right? That was just this very visual idea, and so I made the game so that it to realize that this idea, right? And just made all the rules so that the way people place the tiles will naturally sort of form a mountain, right? So that's another idea. Sometimes it'll be ideas like there's a specific game that I like a lot, but I think it has some issues that sort of bother me every time I play it, right? It's like, if it just could be a little bit more of this or a little bit more of that. And there's this frustration of like, I really like to play sort of this with this core mechanic, but have it to fix some of the issues, right? So sometimes it's just taking something that exists and like making it in a way that I really like and sort of remove some of the issues that I personally see, right? So, yeah, all kinds of places, I guess, for inspiration.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure others will take some ideas from that. And it's interesting because Darren Brown did a series. I don't know Darren Brown, but if you haven't, check him out. Okay, so he actually got a group of marketers, and he showed that they could easily be influenced on the journey, taxi journey, from where they were to the studio they were going to. Gave them a piece of work to carry out, which is to create a marketing selling material. Okay, a bit of an ad. And it was all influenced by what they've seen in the journey. So it was interesting because sometimes what we see others doing or what we experience in our own lives can give us ideas,
Yeah.
thoughts into our head, and that's the psychology of humans. That's what happens. And if we didn't have and see what was going on around in the world around us, then we wouldn't have ideas because we wouldn't be seeing what's going on otherwise. So You can get ideas from all different places. That's just one example how we can easily be influenced. And it could be like, say, you play a game and think, actually, I like that, but I don't like this. I'd love to do something similar, but a little bit different.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, if I had to give tips, I'm not sure if I'm in you know, the right person to like give tips. I'm not sure if I'm still at that point of expertise, but is like go out there and read books or watch movies and talk to people and travel, right? And all of this can be inspiration, right? Um, I think if someone just play board games, right? Hypothetically, um, that's probably not the right way to go about it, right? Like inspiration can come from everywhere, and try to go out of your comfort zone a lot, I think is a good tip to find inspiration.
Absolutely, 100% agree with that. And it can sometimes just enlighten you to a new world, just going outside your comfort zone. So, fantastic tip there. So, I'm sure a lot of people will agree with that, Thomas. So, let's move on to our next question, number 4.
All right.
Okay, so how would you spend your day if you had unlimited resources? So this is a bit of a fluffy question. So if you had unlimited resources, unlimited money, unlimited everything, how would you spend your day? What would you do?
Um, I guess more or less what I do now, design games, and I mean maybe I travel more, for sure. Um, but um, yeah, I mean a lot of what I'm doing now is I I mean all my life I've sort of took decisions, right, and made choices in a way for me to try to um, earn a living doing what I love. And I'm not sure if I'm completely there yet, but I've all made my choices in that way. Like I want to design games and I want to create things, and um, yeah, this I've made sacrifices for that, but this is what I do and what I'm trying to do at least.
Well, the passion certainly comes through, because I'm sure some people say, well, I'm going to get a boat to the Bahamas and spend the day out there. But sometimes it's about the love of what you do just keeps you going, doesn't it? Regardless of what other opportunities might be out there, because sometimes there's a concept that came out from Alan Watts about it's not about following the money, it's about doing what you love and what you're good at. Eventually, when you're good at it, you will do that as a living.
Yes, although I mean in my case, like I've been lucky in some ways in my life, which allowed me to do this, right? So, um, I mean, I also think sometimes it's a mistake. Like, I mean, a lot of people when they interview artists and like famous people, right? And you see an interview and the person will be like, oh, follow your dreams and like I've made it and you just have to work hard. Um, I don't unfortunately I don't think that's always true, right? I mean, of course, when you interview the lucky ones, you interview and people who've worked hard, of course, but generally they've also been lucky in some way or another, right? Like, of course, they'll say, "Oh, follow your dreams" and all that because it worked for them, and um, yeah. So I recognize I've been lucky in a lot of ways also, and I would feel uncomfortable telling someone, "Oh yeah, just do what I did and follow your dreams," because um, I've been lucky.
Yeah, you need a helping hand sometimes, don't you, to get along.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, let's move on to our next question, Thomas. We're on to number
Yes.
5. So, question number 5. Which board games are you unbeatable at?
Um, Not a lot, unfortunately. I I think I'm pretty okay at most of them, but I I'm I love creating games, but oftentimes people will beat me at my own games. Happens very. Not sure if I'm that good of a player. I'll say I think I'm generally quite good at maybe card games. I don't know, with my family. So as I say, my grandmother plays bridge, and when I was younger, we played that or some other card game. So I think maybe trick-taking games and that sort of thing. I'm okay. Like I can hold my own. I've had some trainings.
Well, yeah, I mean, everyone's got their own little expertise in a certain genre of games, haven't they, that they're really good at. And I used to love cards as well when I was growing up. And generally, was my favourite when I was a kid growing up, and playing that classic card game. And I think it's called something else in different countries, or
Oh.
just rummy, it's called, but we call it gin rummy, just to probably because people drinking gin while they're playing it. So that, that was my card game. But yeah, fantastic. So let's move on to the next question, number 6, Thomas.
All right.
How do you know when to walk away from an idea or shelf it for a while?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
So how do you know when to walk away from an idea that you've created or designed and shelf it and perhaps leave it for a while and then go back later to have a look?
That's actually a very relevant question, I think, as a game designer, and a very difficult thing to know. Um, like, as I've been designing games more and more, um, like I feel I've gotten, yes, better at designing them, but I think one of the things I've gotten better at, that's the most important, is that exactly this is like know when to um, put something on the shelf, right? When to abandon a game idea. And it's tough, right? Because like oftentimes, okay, you have an idea and like, oh, this can be great, and you start testing, right? And I think it's pretty easy to make a good game, but it's really hard to make a great one, right? But with experience, like if you take any game idea and you just test and improve and test and improve and take the feedback, you'll make a good game for sure eventually. Like you'll get there. But sometimes this is a dead end, right? Like this good game, if you want to make it great, it needs to be rebuilt from the ground up, right? There's something in it that just, even if you improve it for 1,000 years, it's still gonna be just okay, right? And it's just knowing when a certain concept will hit a dead end that's really difficult, right? You have to sort of predict the trajectory, right? From, usually I give it a month, right? A month of play test. I do at least a play test every week, but usually 2. So let's say about 8 play tests, 8, 10 play tests. If that after this, the trajectory I'm seeing, I'm sort of feeling it's going to reach a dead end, usually I abandon a game idea after a month. is sort of the time frame I'm giving myself to try something. But a few years ago, there were some game ideas I've like worked on for 6 months, right? And eventually it was like, oh, okay, this is getting nowhere. This is not going to be publishable. This is not that good. And put so many hundreds of hours into some of these games. So I'm trying to be a lot more efficient nowadays and quick to like put something away if I'm not feeling where it's going.
Right, and that's okay to do, isn't it? We don't all automatically start designing a game, and it's amazing. And we make mistakes, we learn from them, and then we make improvements, and we go into the next game to try and make that even better than the last one we designed. And sometimes ideas work, sometimes they don't, and that's no different to any creative art.
Hmm. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Fantastic. So let's move on to our next question, number 7. So we've been kind, very nice fluffy ones we have, but
Mhm.
some tough ones. So what regrets do you have on a decision you made that impacted on an outcome? So that could be to do with your game design. So perhaps you made a decision and then that's had quite a significant impact on the output or outcome of a game design. And it might be something you've changed during the playtesting phases, or perhaps there's a decision you made to kind of shelve something and then go back and realise actually it wasn't as bad as I thought, and it's turned out to actually be a great game.
I'm sorry. Is the question you want examples of like decisions that I've made at some point that had like big impact
Absolutely.
changes? Um, yeah, right. I mean, I think the first one that comes to mind is for my game Anomaly, which was published in um, 2019 with Starling Game, which is the only game as we talked about earlier that went on Kickstarter actually. Um, and even though there's a lot of that game that I would probably change if I had the chance to work on it again, it's still a game I'm proud of. And I remember during development of this game, before I signed it, I was sort of reaching a dead end of like, so it's a hidden movement game, one versus all, right? And players were at a certain number of actions, and I think back then it worked with like action points, like like a pandemic or something like that. Okay, you can do X number of actions in your turn, and so on, right? And I was sort of hitting dead end. Like the game was fine, but it wasn't great. And I think someone suggested something like, oh, maybe you could try with cards, right? Having a card base, a card driven system, right? And I went back to the drawing board and like integrated a new card system and also a card system in which when one team uses their card in a certain way, they have to give it to the other team, right? And so the cards had two halves, right? Two parts, one for each team. So and that really improved the game, I think. Like just the switch of like, okay, I completely put away my action system and just rebuild it from the ground up with cards and a new sharing system. It really was quite a dramatic change. So yeah, that's probably the example that the best example I have. And of course, I mean, all of my games went through a lot of iterations, but this one I kind of remember clearly.
Yeah, that's definitely sounds like a significant change, and I don't, I suppose when you're designing games, any particular main component or element of a game, when you change it, it does make a significant change on the outcome of it, but also the feel of the game.
Yeah.
And it could be you've done worker placement, but all of a sudden you've then changed it to a kind of action selection on your own personal board can make a significant difference. So different changes like that certainly can make big, huge leaps in change.
Right, and that's all part of the process, and also when you put it in front of people, try to put it in front of the most people possible, then oftentimes people will give bad suggestions, and that's just part of the thing, but to always sort of be open to everything and just take the most suggestions you have, the most ideas, and filter it. But sometimes there's this little gold nugget of like, wait, that's a different perspective than what I had, and if I go through with it, and sometimes it takes a lot of work, so sometimes we don't want to do it, right? Because it's like, oh, I would need to sort to erase a big part of it and redo it, but to sort of let yourself be open to that, I think is important.
Yeah, it's very good advice indeed. So let's move on to our next question. So we are on to question number 8.
All right.
How many board games do you have? How many do you own?
I don't know. Not this many actually. Like a lot of people in the hobby, at least on Facebook or online, they'll post their Kallax shelves, right, full of board games and stuff, and I just have one 4x4 Kallax of games, and that's it. A while ago I was buying a bit more, but actually most of the games I play these days are prototypes. Like most of my game nights are designing sessions with other designers, and we play each other's games, and that's actually most of the game I play on a just daily basis, I guess, or like weekly basis. It's just prototypes. So I buy a game once in a while if it really interests me, and especially if I know I can play it with my family. But yeah, I try not to buy too many, which maybe will sound a bit weird for someone in the hobby, but I try to restrict myself.
That might be a good thing. I myself from buying games. Hopefully people can, there are a lot of people with a lot of games and sometimes too many, but sometimes it can be good just enjoy what you've got. You don't always have to buy the next best thing, try and get a lot of play at the games you've already got.
Yes, absolutely. And like there's a lot of games sometimes I'll play on, BGA, on Board Game Arena. You probably know the site. So it's helped me also not buy necessarily anything that comes up. Sometimes I go and try some new things there and like, oh, this is fine, but actually I don't think I like it enough to buy it. And maybe if I hadn't tried it there, I would have bought it. But it's sort of also helped me sort of be a bit more precise in what I'm buying.
Yeah,
even though the experience is not the same, of course.
Yeah, it's a good platform to play a game, to test it out, to see whether you enjoy it or not before you start forking money out of your pocket. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Let's move on to question number 9.
Okay.
So question 9 is, what do you think is the most important element of a board game? So you could think of this in terms of the mechanism, or it could be a rule, or it could be the actual artwork that makes it clear than what the player's doing. It could be any type of element within a board game you think is so important when you're designing or playing a game. So is it the game mechanism that's so important, or is it the rule book that has to be crystal clear now to play the game? Is it a particular rule that has to be really crystal clear? Perhaps it's the end-game scoring. It has to be clear. It could be a number of things. It might even be the symbology that has to be super clear and perhaps limited so it doesn't overwhelm the player. So what are your thoughts on that?
Um, I'm gonna give a unsatisfying answer probably, which is all of this. And what I'm giving this answer is that actually I think some people make the mistake of thinking one element is more important. Um, I mean, of course, the rules and the mechanisms is very important as a game designer, and like, but and maybe one could argue this is the most important, but I think a lot of players and sometimes game designers also make the mistake of having too narrow a vision of what actually a game is. Like a game, and I'm not the only one who says that, but a game is really an experience which encompasses everything it is, from the moment you open the box, the way the rules are laid out, the visuals, the theme. Like it's the what you're buying is not is all of this. It's the setup. It's taking the game away to put it back in the box. This is also part of the experience. It's all of that, right? So when you design a game, you need to have all of that into account, right? Even though, like, of course, I'm not doing the illustrations for my prototypes, right? They look a bit not necessarily ugly, but not very beautiful, I guess, my prototypes. But there still needs to be this idea of like what the game could look like in the finished product, and it's really important to have all of it, to take all of it into account, I think.
Certainly good advice. Don't ignore one element. Consider them all just as important as one another.
Yeah, and like just some people will say, oh, visual don't count. It's as long as the game is fun, and it's like, no, visual are really important. Like a beautiful game will sell a lot more. Like it will sell a lot more and will because it brings people a lot more value if it's a beautiful object, right? Like it makes a big difference, and there's art there, and there's like, and just art direction, and as you said, the symbology, all of it is just like, no, it's actually really important that your game is beautiful. Like, don't skip on that. Pay a good artist to make your game.
Beautiful, yeah, absolutely. I completely agree that, and I'm a sucker for that. I love it, and that can be the difference between buying a game and not buying a game. If it looks ugly, I'm not buying it. I don't care how good the game is. I want to immerse myself in that experience, and that's all part of it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's move on to our final question, Thomas. Number 10. So will we get a nice fluffy one, or will we finish with a difficult one? So that's quite a nice one. I like this. So what's your favorite board game mechanism and why?
My favorite board game mechanism of like everything. Like
Yes, out of all of them, you pick one.
um that's a really tough question. Um and do you want a specific instance of that mechanism, like, oh, the mechanism in this particular game, or more like of a class of mechanism,
I
or
think
any of the above?
specific like worker placement, or trick taking, that kind of thing, or deck building. So you can be a little bit vague, but we'll try and get you pin you down to one if we can.
All right, so okay, I'll start a bit vague and maybe give some um, concrete examples that I like. Um, I mean, of course, maybe it would be sort of everything related to limited communication. I really like. And of course, Decrypto is an example of a limited communication sort of mechanism. Codenames, Dixit, um, all of those games. A lot of party games would count as limited communication games as well, I think. So all of that, and this is maybe a bit cheating, but also everything that's related to bluffing, I quite like. It's sort of adjacent, I guess, to limited communication. I'm not necessarily good at bluffing games, but I quite like them. I quite like the experience. But the reason why I'm designing games mostly, and the games that I want to play, are games that really benefit from being physical, from having people around the table. That's really all those mechanisms that really benefit from this. So again, limited communication, bluffing, all of that are difficult to replicate digitally, right, with video games. Those are really the reasons why I love board games, that having those people around the table. Also negotiation, I really like everything related to negotiation, right? All of those mechanisms. Chinatown is a big a game I really like. I tried a number of times to make a good negotiation games and failed many times to make something that was better than what already exists. Yeah, I mean, I'm okay with all the worker placement and deck buildings and stuff like that, but it's not what appeals to me the most, I think, in games. And if I want to have this deep intellectual experience or really tight mechanisms, I tend to go a bit more towards video games if I want to have that straight experience of just interacting with the system, right? But if I'm around the table with other people, I want a game that really takes advantage of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's that social aspect, isn't it? Having fun and an enjoyable experience, different giggles and laughs, and that was great. It's a great social event, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You want those reactions. You want this those laughs, those tense moments of those pounding on the table, those looks of people being suspicious, wondering if you're lying, what you're saying, so yeah, this is that's the stuff.
Well, I'm actually hopeless for those types of games, but never mind. I remember me and Tim sat down and played Link Key, and I think I got nearly every single one of them wrong trying to play that game. But the experience was enjoyable, and that's what matters. So
Yeah.
that's to the end, and we hope you've really enjoyed this. And if you haven't already done so, please consider subscribing to the channel and hit that like button, and also leave a comment down below. Any particular highlights from today's show that you really enjoyed, and perhaps there's some questions you'd like us to ask guests the next time for our next season. As we come towards the end of season 1, we've got a couple of more guests to come on. So we hope you enjoyed this. My name's Jay Sears. I'd like to thank our guest, Thomas Lesperance, the designer of Decrypto, and we hope you've enjoyed this today. Until next time, take care.